on the air with Brittney Griner's friends making the case for her to get out of Russia and get home to America, with the slightest of smiles from BG when she saw the people in court today vouching for her character and her leadership. Our latest reporting on what's next for the WNBA superstar as she tries to convince a judge to give her something less than 10 years behind bars, with the possibility of a prisoner swap apparently on the table. And we'll talk to the family member of another American detained in Russia about how she and her brother are doing. Plus, a South Carolina lawyer accused of a whole web of corruption, facing new charges today for murdering his own wife and son. We're going to take you behind the scenes on that. Plus, some breaking news tonight as we learn of the death of Ivana Trump, actress, model, ex-wife of former President Trump. We'll tell you what the family's saying now as Mr. Trump makes news of his own on a different front. And the woman behind Where the Crawdads Sing, you probably read it. You might go watch it since it's premiering in theaters as a movie now. She's wanted for questioning about a 90s-era African murder. So why? And will she talk? Plus, a new suicide prevention hotline, 988, goes online with new questions about whether it's actually ready. We're going to give you a closer look in our original a little later on in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and for the first time since pleading guilty, we're now seeing WNBA star Brittney Griner in a Moscow courtroom today, as the court hears testimony from two people who were a key part of her life inside Russia, defending her character. Take a look at however you're watching on your screen. This is her right before she's going in. You see she kind of gives a little half smile there. She's joined by her lawyers, by reps from the U.S. Embassy. No cameras inside the courtroom, by the way, but we do know the defense team called the head of her Russian basketball club, where she was playing during her WNBA offseason, to the stand. Not only did he describe Griner as an outstanding player, but a responsible person. We also heard from one of Griner's teammates she'd been playing with for 7 years, who called Griner a true leader and a role model, and said her contribution to Russian basketball was invaluable. The backdrop to all this, of course, is what's happening politically. As you know, the Kremlin's been accused of using Griner as a political pawn, basically, while President Biden's come under a ton of pressure from her family, her friends, even celebrities to get her home ASAP. Griner had been detained in Moscow back in February after Russian officials say they found vape cartridges with cannabis oil in them. She could be looking at 10 years in a penal colony. Andrea Mitchell is joining us now. So, Andrea, we mentioned no cameras in court, but we did see that shot of Brittney Griner walking down that hallway. Talk about how impactful it was. And I know we had a producer in the room to hear from people that were part of Griner's life in Russia.
Well, that was the important thing. These were Russians. The Russians advocating for her. She's played with them for 7 years. This is not her first season in Russia, because the women at the WNBA do not make money like the men do, so they can make 4 or 5 times as much money. So there she was going back to Russia, and she gets stopped. She gets trapped in this terrible situation. And then these were her friends, her teammate, the team captain, I should point out, the team doctor vouching for her and saying she's never failed a drug test at any time from the Russian drug authorities, from any of the drug authorities in all these years that he's been the team doctor. So, saying she has some medical issues. She's got scoliosis, a painful back condition. She has ADHD. So, she's maybe with her attention deficit disorder, she didn't realize she was packing it. Maybe the scoliosis, that was the implication. He did say he had not prescribed cannabis for her. And with her just arriving in Russia, he wouldn't have prescribed that. So they were trying to create, a sense of who she is and how important she is to the team. And Hallie, whether that works for leniency, there is no real method for that. And again today, the Russians, principally Maria Zakharova, the very well-known, long-time spokeswoman for the foreign ministry, saying all this pressure is bad, it will backfire, the publicity, the celebrity for her. And I talked to Jeanne Shaheen, of course, experienced senator from the Foreign Relations Committee, and she said, no, that's not the case. This is helping her. It's keeping it front and center for the American public and also certainly for Russia.
Well, we're a matter of hours away now from court continuing, this hearing continuing, but they're not going to physically be in the courtroom, right? We thought for a minute that maybe Griner would appear herself and testify tomorrow. It sounds like that has changed.
Well, that's changed, and we think we're going to hear from her again, that there'll be another public session. Well, it's not public, but, not an open session, but they'll be there, not virtually. She may be submitting some documents, or her defense may be. We know that she wants to make a more complete statement of apology. So that may be one of the next steps. It's very opaque. This is not like any American court system. And in fact, you refer to her as a political pawn, and that's what the U.S. says she is.
So given that, Andrea, just quickly here, what are the prospects? And we keep circling around this idea, Victor Bout, right? This prisoner swap. That's the guy, this notorious arms dealer who the Russians want back in Russia. Like, where are we on that front? What do we think is going to happen?
Well, I would think eventually that might be determined, but the president would really have to sign off on that. This guy has been called the merchant of death. He's in jail for 25 years, so that would be swapping a convicted criminal and one of the worst on the international scene, whom we found in somewhere in South Asia when brought back here, and exchanging him, and he's close to Putin, and he worked for Putin, and he's a favorite of the Kremlin's, exchanging him for someone we say is an innocent hostage. And according to Mike McFaul, whom I was talking to just the other day about this, the former ambassador to Russia, he said we should do a deal, but we should do a big deal. We should get, Mark Fogel out. We should get Paul Whelan out. We should get Brittney Griner out. We should say we want all of our Americans home.
Andrea Mitchell, we're glad to have you leading off the show with us tonight. Thank you. And later in the show, by the way, I'm talking with Elizabeth Whelan, the sister of Paul Whelan, another American who's being detained, held in Moscow. He's been there since 2018. Stick around for that in just a couple minutes. We've got some other headlines here at home to get to, too, including today in South Carolina, a grand jury officially charging a controversial lawyer with murdering his own wife and son. A devastating update to a mysterious story that you might remember has taken a ton of twists and turns over the past year. Alec Murdoch had been at the center of a whole bunch of investigations in that time. And today, he says he's innocent. In a statement, you see it here, his lawyer is writing, Alec wants everyone to know he didn't have anything to do with their deaths and that he loved his wife Maggie and his son Paul more than anything in the world. Remember how this all went down. Murdoch comes from a powerful legal family in rural South Carolina. He called 911 back in 2021 on June 7th, told them he found his wife and his son dead at their secluded hunting lodge. In early September, the law firm founded by Murdoch's great-grandfather accused him of stealing money from them. Prosecutors say not long after that, Murdoch asked a friend who was allegedly involved in a money laundering and painkiller ring to shoot him, to physically take a gun and shoot him so his surviving son could get a $10 million life insurance policy. And now there's this. He's charged of murder. Gabe Gutierrez is joining us now. There are so many layers to this. Issa, what are we learning from the indictment here in this Murdoch case?
There really are, Hallie. So this indictment today is alleging that on the night of June 7th of last year, Alec Murdoch murdered his wife, who at the time was 52, and his son, who at the time was 22, with malice. It's saying that he fatally shot his wife with a rifle and fatally shot his son with a shotgun. He's being charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. But like you said, Hallie, this has really been a saga. Murdoch, just for context, has been behind bars since October on financial charges. He's faced, before today, 16 indictments, dozens of charges. Most recently, the ones you mentioned, alleging his involvement in an 8-year money laundering and painkiller ring. If he is convicted of these now the most serious crimes that he's facing of murder, he could face 30 years to life in prison. And because they are in the state of South Carolina, prosecutors could also seek the death penalty for him if he's convicted because 2 people were killed. Hallie?
The lawyers for Alec Murdoch say it's clear from day one. They say that officials, the AG, prematurely blamed their client, basically. What's their plan? What's their strategy to try to fight this?
So in their statement today, Hallie, they also talk about motive. They say that their client had no motive whatsoever to murder his son and his wife. So that is something that we can definitely expect them to focus on in any upcoming trial in the next couple of months. But also in the past, his attorneys have said that Murdoch had an alibi on that night of June 7th last year. They say that he was with his mother, who has dementia, and with her caregiver that night. Today, they also said that they will be immediately motioning for a speedy trial, saying that the Attorney General should, per law, hand over all of the evidence that they have in the next 30 days, and that within 60 days of that, there should be a trial. Hallie?
Gabe Gutierrez live for us on this story. We're going to be watching this case as it continues to make its way through court. Appreciate it, Issa. oversees a key moment for President Biden tonight now as he's getting ready for that visit to Saudi Arabia less than 24 hours from now, looking to avoid some political landmines on the human rights front, specifically related to that very highly anticipated and highly controversial meeting with the person on the other side of your screen, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. That's the same guy the U.S. says is responsible for brutally murdering Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. As President Biden defends his Saudi trip and on a separate front seems to have put a little bit of distance between himself and Israeli Prime Minister on Iran. Both don't want Iran to get nukes, but they're not exactly eye to eye on the best way to go about achieving that. Listen.
Diplomacy is the best way to achieve this outcome, and we'll continue to work with Israel to counter other threats from Iran throughout the region.
Diplomacy will not stop them. The only thing that will stop Iran is knowing that if they continue to develop their nuclear program, the free world will use force.
Kelly O'Donnell is joining us now live from Jerusalem. Kelly, we're glad to see you with us. And let me break this up into what I think might be sort of three headline buckets, if you will. The first relates to this trip upcoming. I assume you're getting on the charter to head over to Saudi because the president's heading there. And this big question is, how does he manage Jamal Khashoggi? It seems like he was indicating from this news conference today that he doesn't feel the need to reiterate where he stands. He thinks it's pretty clear. But a lot of people are watching to see how he handles this.
Well, one of the things that we noticed is that the president would not directly answer the question if he would raise this issue of the murder with any of the Saudi leadership. That doesn't mean he won't, but he would not answer that question directly. And he defended that by saying his position is so well known and that it is not a secret to anyone what his views are. Over the last couple of years, he's been asked about this a lot. As you know, as a candidate, he called out the kingdom as a pariah because of its conduct on human rights and in particular this killing. And so one of the things we'll have to look for and try to press the president on in the final chapter of this overseas trip is once the meeting happens, did they bring it up? Did it come up? He says he always presses human rights. Will he get specific? If he doesn't, one could argue that might be about the other issues that bring him to this part of the world and ultimately to Saudi Arabia, where he will go tomorrow. The first president to fly from Israel to Saudi Arabia. And that's part of the broader issue of trying to have more open relations between Israel, between Saudi Arabia and other countries here. So it is a problem for the president that the Khashoggi killing and what he has said about it puts him in a position where he has to deal with a leader like the Crown Prince and his father, the king, with that history. But those are the facts he has, and he has said that he believes the U.S. interests are worth making this trip. Hallie?
There's also the Iran factor in all of this, Kelly, as you look at the president navigating the region, navigating, of course, the Abraham Accords, et cetera. There's the Iran piece of this, too, and some of that, I think it's fair to say, distance between him and the Israeli prime minister about how to handle that, diplomacy or force.
There is so much where the U.S. and Israel agree that when you get to the issue of Iran, you can see some of the areas where they view it differently. They have a different approach, a different emphasis. In Israel, of course, Iran is a threat to its very existence. It is priority number one. For the U.S., a critical priority, but not quite the same intensity. So certainly the president said diplomacy is the way he would want to go first, hoping to get Iran back in the nuclear deal that was canceled by former President Trump. Israel doesn't like that idea, never liked that idea, and doesn't believe that Iran can be trusted. And so he is saying, the Prime Minister Lapid is saying, military force may be the only thing that Iran understands to stop them from getting a nuclear weapon. President Biden says, yes, that may be necessary, but that should be a last resort. So in big sweeping ways, they agree. Tactically, emphasis, things like that, you can see some different approaches and some division, but they are certainly partnered with the same outcome. Getting there, the road may be different. And, Hallie, you remember what these rooftops were like when you were on the beat with us, how windy it is. So pardon all of the
girl, you're holding it down
here.
fine. You're holding it down good. Can the wind hold off for one quick question before I let you go, Kelly? Because I am interested in the sort of the dichotomy between the international issues that the president is juggling and these domestic issues at home, like record inflation, for example. How much is that coming up, if at all, even behind the scenes from officials you're talking to, or is his focus really solely on these overseas issues?
Well, certainly inflation is a global problem. Energy concerns are a global problem. And so there are other leaders who are definitely dealing with this as well. The unique position of the American president in a midterm year with the approval rating that he has, with the views of Americans feeling the pain on all kinds of budget issues, from gas to groceries and everything in between. So it does come up, and certainly when he's in Saudi Arabia, he will be talking about energy security, which is sort of the diplomatic term for all the other issues that are much more accessible to our viewers and to voters, and that is what we pay at the pump and so forth. So he will certainly be trying to get greater oil production. That is not something that is expected to be an outcome of this trip, but over the next few months is what advisors have said. But he will certainly raise that issue among many, and certainly he'll have that on his mind when he heads back home. And as reporters get to interact with him, certainly issues from home always come along on these trips.
For sure.
Hallie?
Kelly O'Donnell live for us in Jerusalem. If I remember correctly, Kelly, it may be windier in Saudi, so I hope you have the ponytail holders. Thank you. To Indiana now, where the attorney general there says he's investigating the doctor in that state who gave a 10-year-old rape victim an abortion after that little girl crossed state lines to get the procedure that is banned where she lives in Ohio. Now, keep in mind, abortion is legal in Indiana, along with the other states that you see there on the screen. But in an interview with Fox News, Indiana's AG framed this as part of a fight against abortion access. In a statement later, he said his office is looking into whether the doctor failed to report the procedure in that state. Gabe Gutierrez is joining us now. And Gabe, the Indiana AG has said it's a crime to intentionally not report abortions, and he'd look into the doctor's license. But at this point, it seems as though there's not an indication that there are problems with her license or that she didn't report the case. Give us the context check.
Yeah, Hallie. So this is a story that, as you know, and as you reported on yesterday, really has become this national flashpoint in the abortion debate. And I've been speaking with people on both sides of the issue really throughout the day, and it's incredible to know just how inflamed passions have been on both sides. It's the situation here with the Indiana AG. Look, yes, he says that he will investigate this particular OBGYN. She was the initial source that was reported on by the Indianapolis Star-Tribune earlier this month that got this whole thing started. The story went viral. Then President Biden cited it last week. Then Republicans, doubted the truth to the story. And of course, many of them had to walk that back in the last day or so after the suspect, a 27-year-old out of Columbus, Ohio, was arrested and charged. He's now being held on $2 million bail. So yes, the Republican AG out in Indiana says that he will now investigate the OBGYN for failing to report this. At least that's what he's alleging at this point. Her supporters and supporters of abortion rights, who I've spoken with today, say that that's ridiculous, that this is more about access to abortion, and that it is a tragedy that this young child, this young girl, had to cross state lines in order to get that abortion, they say.
You talk about, Gabe, and I think you're spot on here, how much this particular story has highlighted so much of this national discussion around abortion access. We have to remember, there are real people whose lives are involved here. President Biden citing this story. We've seen, and we talked about 24 hours ago when this story was first breaking, some of the initial reaction from some of those on the right questioning whether this story was true. Obviously, this arrest happened. More details came out. I look at today, for example, a top attorney for National Right to Life has suggested that perhaps this girl this 10-year-old victim should have carried the baby, her pregnancy to term, essentially, an anti-abortion group, of course. You have Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan for the first time responding to all this on camera today. I think it was over with CNN in the hallways of the Capitol, Gabe. Let me play a little bit of this interaction here and how Jordan frames this and after his initial response. Watch.
Would you apologize to the girl and the family for suggesting it was a lie?
Never doubted the child. I was responding to a headline from your profession, the news profession, which happens all the time on Twitter.
So that's Congressman Jordan not addressing the substance of the question, but instead going after the media. What else are you hearing about where this all goes next, Gabe, as this has really become such a flashpoint? Yeah,
today, Hallie, everybody's been really careful, Republicans, that they didn't doubt the story of the child. However, they did doubt the story of the OBGYN who was cited by the local newspaper, and they're kind of dancing around that part of the story. Now, what I have said, what I've heard today, and I have spoken with another anti-abortion activist, and what they're pointing out is that now, with so many questions surrounding the story, and they claim that they still have questions about this, when was it initially reported? Well, we did find out, according to the court documents and the arraignment yesterday, that the initial rape was first reported in late June, that the child then traveled to Indiana in, I believe, June 30th, and then, but it wasn't until this week that the DNA, that the suspect was swabbed, and that a warrant was carried out, and then the suspect was arrested. But the way Jim Jordan and some others have framed it is that there are still, some outstanding questions here, and that the Biden administration, in their view, should not be exploiting this. As they see it, that they should not be exploiting the story of this young girl. So certainly there's unanswered questions here in terms of where this goes from here, but it is, as you said, has highlighted this fierce debate over abortion as different states try to clarify their abortion laws following the reversal of Roe v. Wade. Hallie.
Gabe Gutierrez, we'll look for more of your reporting on this tonight on Nightly. Thanks, Gabe. Good to see you. Some developing news into us tonight regarding the death of Ivana Trump, the first wife of Donald Trump and the mother of his 3 oldest kids. She has died tonight at the age of 73. The former president says his ex-wife died at her home in New York City, calling her a wonderful, beautiful, and amazing woman. Her son, Eric, saying this to reporters very quickly just a minute ago.
It's been a very sad day, guys. Very sad day.
That's him getting into his car, just saying what a sad day it is. His mother passing away. Of course, Ivana was the mother of Eric, Don Jr., and Ivanka Trump. She was born in Czechoslovakia and married the former president back in 1977. During their marriage, she held key positions inside the Trump organization and a key spot in pop culture. You might remember this line from her cameo in The First Wives Club.
Ladies, we have to be strong and independent. And remember, what? Don't get mad. Get everything.
No word yet on how the 73-year-old died. As you can see, the post now from Instagram from Eric Trump about who he describes as his beloved mother, Ivana, calling her an incredible woman of force in business, a world-class athlete, a radiant beauty, and a caring mother and friend. There is no indication of any foul play. As the Trump family mourns the death of Ivana, there is other news on a different front about the former president himself, Donald Trump, specifically his political ambitions, with new reporting out today suggesting it is not a matter of if, but simply when he will announce a run for 2024. And reportedly, it's going to happen soon, like real soon, maybe even before the midterms. This is according to the Washington Post and New York Magazine, too. It comes as Mr. Trump is facing multiple investigations by federal prosecutors over the Capitol insurrection and over the possible mishandling of classified White House documents and election interference. Just in the last few days, there have been questions raised of whether he tried to tamper with a witness that the January 6th Select Committee was trying to talk to, a member, we now can confirm at NBC News, of the White House support staff at the time. We understand the Justice Department has been told of these allegations, these accusations, but none of it apparently is enough to stop former President Trump from thinking about 2024. He says he feels very confident if he does decide to run, he will win. Let's bring in Vaughn Hilliard now, who is covering the Trump beat for us. He's live for us. A lot of places to start with this, Vaughn. So let's start with the potential for Donald Trump to come out before the midterms and announce that he is going to run for president. I was on the phone with a member of Congress this weekend who said to me the single best thing that could happen to Joe Biden, right, President Biden, with his lower approval ratings right now relative to other presidents, is for Donald Trump to announce a run, because you'd see the Democratic Party, in this person's view, coalesce around the president, and you'd see some really tough questions for some Republicans in precarious positions out on the campaign trail who are looking to hold on to their seats.
In Republicans ultimately running for the U.S. Senate, for governor, they're going to have to answer the question, to what extent would they be a partner to Donald Trump if he were, in fact, to run and win the White House? I mean, we're talking about 6-year terms in the Senate, 4-year terms for governor. So that suddenly becomes a very legitimate question. And we saw in 2020 with the role that governors played, the role that members of Congress played in certifying the election, just how critical of a question that actually is. And that's where you see Donald Trump today in the most explicit of terms yet, in that interview with our friend Olivia Nuzzi over at New York Mag, lay out that he's already made his decision, and as he told Olivia, it's just a matter of whether he makes it before the midterms or after the midterms. A large part of this decision, look, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is really seen as his main competitor at this point New York Times Siena College poll released this week shown with about 25% of support among Republican voters nationally. But Ron DeSantis, he's having to run for re-election himself for governor this November. So essentially, before he makes any major announcement, he's got to wait till that point here. And of course, Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, all of them, they've all made their stops to Iowa. The former president may look at this as an opportunity to essentially cement his role in this party ahead.
You know, it feels important to reference here, and we're talking about it, and we've spent many hours covering the January 6th Select Committee and their investigation into the former president's lies to try to overturn the legitimate 2020 election results, the damage that they point out that has done to the democratic process, the questions that has raised among some people who are followers or sort of part of the MAGA movement that support former President Donald Trump. And yet this is somebody who has potentially a chance to win the White House come 2024. How much, when you're talking to sources, does that play into this idea that that the U.S. only narrowly dodged, right, a democratic constitutional crisis? Here we are looking at the next election. And, oh, by the way, the specter raised a potential witness tampering, with NBC News confirming the former president did call a member, what Chairman Benny Thompson said today was a White House employee, we know to be a White House support staffer, who'd been in talks with that committee.
And, Hallie, that's why we've paid so much attention to this so-called purge campaign that Donald Trump has openly been on these last several months, trying to oust the likes of any Republican lawmakers who have spoken out against him or voted to impeach him. You know, in a couple of weeks, we're looking at Liz Cheney's race, could potentially be ousted from Congress by a fellow Republican, Harriet Hageman, who is challenging her. And I think it's important when we look at, you know, Tom Rice, who you had a conversation with a month ago in South Carolina, a Republican congressman who was kicked out of office in his primary challenge. There were no Republicans that ran to South Carolina to defend him and his impeachment votes against Donald Trump. The only one was Paul Ryan. And of course, that is where Donald Trump is looking to build up an alliance in this Republican Party. And again, we got to go back to 2020. You know, Arizona, Joe Biden won by just 10,000 votes. Wisconsin, 20,000 votes. Georgia, 12,000 votes. That election was close when you look at the numbers there, Hallie.
Vaughn Hilliard, thank you very much for that reporting. Appreciate it. To Virginia now, that is under a state of emergency tonight because a ton of rain slammed into one county there, Buchanan out west, caused serious flooding this week, knocking out power in some spots. Dozens of people were displaced. But we learned today that all 42 of the people who were reported missing in the storm last night, they've all been accounted for. Amazingly, the Buchanan County Chief Deputy says no reported deaths so far, that everybody is, so far as we know, okay. NBC's Kathy Park is in Oakwood, Virginia. And Kathy, let's be real, it is rare that we get to report on something that sounds incredibly scary, dozens of people missing after a terrible storm, and then get to come on and say, but it looks like pretty good news that all of them have survived.
Yeah, it certainly is extraordinary news. And, you know, we're kind of holding our breath, right? Because obviously when you cover natural disasters like this, you kind of wait and see what these rescue efforts hold. And just a couple of hours ago, yes, we got the extraordinary and fantastic news that everyone has been accounted for. And officials are saying that, look, it was a multi-agency effort. They had resources coming in from all directions, from nearby jurisdictions, from Bristol, Roanoke. And you mentioned it was, you know, we're still under a state of emergency. So you had state level resources as well. They were basically combing through a 30-mile disaster zone, essentially, and knocking on doors, going door to door. They said they kind of combed through 400 different structures. And at the end of the day, they were able to account for everybody, and everyone has been found safe and sound. Hallie?
What about the resources that Virginia may need now? Because you look at some of the pictures we've been showing, Kathy, the damage from this storm, the cleanup, you know, it's a huge ordeal at this point.
Yeah, when you look at the aerials, especially, you kind of just see the magnitude of the damage. It certainly is widespread. When you turn into some of these communities, we were there just a few minutes ago. It's about 10 minutes from here, that disaster zone, and it really is a muddy mess. Every turn you make, some of these homes, the floodwaters got so intense that actually these homes shifted off from their foundations, and the floodwaters got so intense at times, a lot of these massive tree limbs actually got lodged on the bridges and overpasses. But once again, the rain came down so hard and fast, several inches of rain in a matter of hours. Some people are saying that it's not something that they've ever seen before. We spoke with someone in his 80s, and he said he remembers a storm from 77, but this one really takes the cake, Hallie.
Kathy Park live for us there in Virginia. Kathy, thank you for being there for us. Appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, Kevin Spacey pleading not guilty to sex assault charges in a British court today. We'll talk about what's next in his legal fight. Plus, how one gallery found a hidden Van Gogh portrait behind another painting. Look at that. We'll have the story when we come back. For a lot of people, their plans this weekend may include going out to see the new movie, Where the Crawdads Sing. It's in select theaters tonight. It is an enormously popular book. And it's starting to get all over the news, not just because of the film, but because of the author of the book the movie is based on. Like a character in Crawdads, Delia Owens is reportedly wanted for questioning about a murder. According to People magazine, Owens, her ex-husband, and his son from a previous marriage moved to Zambia to work on nature conservation. Their work ended up getting featured in a 1996 documentary on ABC. The program captured shots getting fired at an unidentified so-called trespasser, and the faces of potential shooters were blurred. NBC News has not reviewed this video. ABC did not immediately respond for comment. The Owens family has all denied to other outlets that they were involved in any way in this death. A Zambian official told The Atlantic last month there is no statute of limitations on murder in the country. Joining me now to talk about it, People magazine senior movie news editor Nigel Smith. Nigel, I'm glad to have you on. Help us understand, walk us through this, right? What else do we know about what happened now 2 decades plus ago, and what went down as this special was getting made?
Well, as the special was getting made, this incident took place. And as you said, what we know about this very, very mysterious up until this date incident is that the footage tape caught 3 rounds of shots being fired at an unidentified trespasser. And the host of this special segment on ABC News was Meredith Vieira, who we all know from The View. And she referred to this person as a trespasser because at the time they couldn't identify whether the person was actually a poacher. And the faces, as you said, of the potential shooters were blurred. And what we later learned from the cinematographer on the project was that he alleged that 2 shots fired actually came from the gun of the son of Mark's first marriage, which, as you said, Delia later denied.
Has she said anything more recently about this, Nigel? There's obviously press around the movie. The book was hugely popular. I know that, and as we said, previously there were denials at all about it being involved in the death whatsoever. But tell us more about that piece of it.
Yeah, she hasn't really addressed it. I think the PR team surrounding the film's obviously done a really good job of not allowing the press to exactly go there in their line of questioning with her. But she did talk to us at length about her love for wildlife, her love for the wilderness, and her love for elephants, which is, what her and her ex-husband were doing there in Africa at the time, trying to stop poachers from killing so many elephants in Africa. But yeah, that is all that we know so far in terms of what they have told us.
So what happens? Does this just kind of go back to being on the back burner after this big press blitz about this movie happens?
Well, now it's back in the news, right? I mean, we're talking about it. It's everywhere. Zambian authorities, police authorities have been telling outlets that they're still seeking her ex-husband and his son for questioning in relation to this murder. No charges have been filed, but they just want some answers to this. And now that the book and the movie, of course, is making the rounds in the press, I mean, it just opens the floodgates for people really wanting to know more.
Nigel Smith, thank you. Appreciate it. Glad you walked us through it. Thank you. Let's get you over to the 5 things now our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 2, Congress honoring Herschel Woody Williams today. Military members carrying his casket into the Capitol Rotunda, where he's lying in honor. Williams was the last remaining Medal of Honor recipient from World War II. He died last month at the age of 98. He got the medal in 1945, received it from President Truman for his actions during the Battle at Iwo Jima. Number 2, a Senate investigation shows Amazon gave Ring doorbell footage to law enforcement without the permission of the person who was using the Ring at least 11 times this year. That disclosure came in a letter from from the company that Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey is making public. Amazon said it wouldn't share customer info with police without consent unless there's a, in their words, emergency circumstance. The company said these 11 cases did fall under that emergency circumstance. We don't know what specifically the videos were of. Number 3, actor Kevin Spacey pleading not guilty in a UK court today to charges of sexually assaulting 3 men. He also pleaded not guilty to a charge of causing somebody to engage in penetrative sexual activity without consent. His trial is set for next June. Number 4, art experts came across something pretty extraordinary. A super rare Van Gogh self-portrait, they say, behind another painting. The National Galleries of Scotland says they found it while taking an X-ray of a painting called Head of a Peasant Woman. You might be thinking, why was it on the back? Van Gogh was not a spendy guy. He didn't like to spend a ton of money, so he would reuse canvases. He would flip over the canvases and use the back to, like, save money. And if you're really into this, there's going to be an exhibit in Edinburgh starting at the end of this month where you can see the secret portrait through a light box. Kind of cool. Number 5, a new Barbie is out, the first of its Barbie kind, made of recycled plastic, dedicated to Dr. Jane Goodall, known for her groundbreaking studies of chimpanzees and for her big push on conservation. Goodall says she is thrilled to partner with Barbie to encourage kids to learn from their environment. When we come back, we're talking with the sister of Paul Whelan, the American who's also detained in Russia right now, on her family's mission to get him home. That one-on-one live right after the break. We told you about the trial of WNBA superstar Brittney Griner playing out as we speak. She is seeking to get a shorter sentence than what might be recommended, 10 years at a penal colony. And it comes as families of other Americans detained abroad are also fighting for help to get their loved ones out. Families like the Whelans, who heard from President Biden for the first time since Paul Whelan was detained in Russia 3.5 years ago. You see him there. He's been held in Moscow since 2018 after a court there convicted him on espionage charges, which Whelan and the U.S. government, by the way, deny. A lot more attention now on his case with the spotlight on Brittney Griner. I want to bring in here Paul's sister, Elizabeth Whelan, who is joining us for the first time on this show on NBC News Now. Elizabeth, it's good to see you again. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
We're glad to shine a spotlight on the case of both Brittney Griner and of your brother here. So let me start off. How's Paul doing? Has your family had any contact with him recently? What's the latest?
Well, actually, my parents had a call from him today, and he is very frustrated. I mean, actually, we've all been a bit low since Trevor Reed came home. We were so delighted to see Trevor back and just devastated that Paul didn't come with him. But that phone call from the president on Friday to me, that lifted everyone's spirits. We were able to tell Paul about it, and, you know, that's such a help. But I have to say, we all have to remember that it's not President Biden who's holding Paul hostage. That's right. In this case of hostage diplomacy, it's Russia. And so, you know, just as National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said earlier this week, it'll probably take a government-to-government solution to get Paul and Brittney home.
You mentioned the government-to-government solution, which brings me to a quick question for you. These news reports that perhaps former Governor Bill Richardson, who was involved, we know, with the Trevor Reed case, may be traveling to Moscow to try to get both Paul and Brittney Griner freed. Is there anything you can share with us on that front?
Well, I don't have any details, I'm afraid. Okay. You know, Governor Richardson is known for his humanitarian missions on the part of Americans. And actually, wrongful detainees and hostages and their families, we now have the help of a number of different non-government organizations, Hostage US and the James Foley Foundation, to help with advocacy and support. So we're just grateful for everyone who wants to help get Paul Whelan home.
You said two things that I found interesting in your first answer, Elizabeth. You said that Paul is feeling very frustrated. I mean, obviously, right? But tell me more about that. What's behind that for him? And did he get any kind of boost by hearing about the call that you had with President Biden?
He definitely got a boost, but you can imagine he knows he's innocent. He's been in Russian jails for 3.5 years, first 2 years in Lefortovo prison, which is a very notorious prison in Moscow. And now he's being held at a forced labor camp 8 hours away from that. And he has to do the labor 6 days a week. It's a grueling existence. When you think of a Stalin-era gulag, they really haven't updated them since the 1940s. It's not a great existence. He wants to come home to Michigan.
Is he physically okay? I asked because we know that Trevor Reed, for example, had issues with, I think he'd been on a hunger strike. He had some other issues as well. How is Paul physically doing?
Well, right now he's doing okay. I mean, he's had to have, over the course of time, he's had to have emergency surgery. He's been extremely ill at various times. Right now he's doing okay. But the kinds of problems that we tend to have is, for example, we sent him some cold medication in March that he could really use, and he isn't being given it. This sort of thing has happened over and over again, that, you know, I mean, they're just... We even have to send food, other supplies, that kind of thing to him. It's really an extraordinary experience.
Extraordinary, to say the least. Before I let you go, Elizabeth, how are you doing? And what do you want people to know about your brother? What is your message to people who may be watching about your brother and about the administration's efforts to get him home?
Well, I do hope everybody is being supportive of this whole push to get not only my brother, but Brittney and other Americans held around the world back home. You know, you might wonder to yourself, well, you know, I'm not going to go to Russia. Why does this concern me? But I really feel that Americans should feel free to travel wherever they want to. If we have relations with a country, if we're sending money to a country, if we have treaties with a country, we should be able to travel there without fear of arbitrary detention.
Does Paul talk at all about Brittney Griner, or has that not come up in these conversations?
Oh, we've certainly let him know. I mean, of course, he's interested, but he is very closely monitored by the guards on these phone calls. So there's a limit to what he's been able to say. But of course, I mean, I'm sure he imagines all that she is going through because he had to endure his own sham trial.
Elizabeth Whelan, we are so grateful to you for sharing more about what Paul is doing, for allowing us to shine a spotlight on what is happening to him at this incredibly critical moment. Thank you so much. We hope to have you back on the show. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your interest in Paul.
Always. Thanks. Coming up here on the show, states are getting ready to start using a new mental health hotline this weekend, a super important tool, right? But is it going to be up and running on time to be able to save lives? We'll talk about that. Plus, police having some trouble catching a bull on the run, so they called in some cowboys. That story's next in The Local. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Northeast Bureau, a federal grand jury indicted the man accused of shooting people at a Buffalo grocery store 2 months ago on hate crimes and on firearms charges today. He faces up to life imprisonment or possibly the death penalty if convicted. The suspect's already in custody on state charges in New York. You'll remember that 10 people were killed in that attack. And by the way, the supermarket, the Tops Market, set to reopen there in that neighborhood in Buffalo tomorrow. From our West Coast Bureau, officials say University of Oregon football star Spencer Webb died after falling on rock slides and hitting his head. It happened at a lake something like 35 miles away from the school's campus. The 22-year-old star played tight end for the Ducks. Police say there's no evidence of foul play. His death appears to be accidental. So many people mourning his death tonight. From our Northeast Bureau, looked like a scene from a Western in New Hampshire this week. Cowboys on horseback had help to capture a loose bull. The local police department shared this video. Cowboys with lassos in hand chasing down this bull after it escaped a farm in Massachusetts. They found it in New Hampshire 3 days later. The bull is now back home. We want to bring you tonight's original now with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been watching. And listen, if there's ever a medical emergency, you probably know the first thing you should do. What is it? You call 911, okay? But what if you're having, or somebody you know is having, a mental health emergency? What do you call, right? Do you know? There's a national suicide prevention lifeline. We've told you about it many times here on this show. I bet you can't tell me the number right now. That's going to get a lot easier starting Saturday, because instead of dialing like a 10-digit number, all you have to do is call 988. 988. That's the 911 for mental health emergencies, 988. But even though the switch to 988 is happening in something like 48 hours from now, there are some concerns that some states will not be ready for that big transition. Here's our Ron Allen with the latest.
Have you heard the news about 988? Don't worry, I got you. 988 is a game changer for those who are in crisis.
It's taken years to make it happen. Starting Saturday, 988 will become the new suicide prevention telephone lifeline across the country, replacing the longer 10-digit 800 number. According to the Centers for Disease Control, in 2020, about 20% of Americans age 18 or older face some kind of mental health illness. That's 1 in 5 adults, a figure growing even before the COVID pandemic made the problem worse, according to the World Health Organization.
I truly believe that shame is at the core of mental health struggle.
Kyle Freeman has experienced the crisis from numerous perspectives. Her brother took his own life. She admits she's contemplated suicide as well, and is glad the issue is being talked about openly.
When my brother died, I made a decision that I wouldn't be silenced by his suicide. And so I speak up to save my own life. I speak up on behalf of other people who are scared because of shame to speak up.
She's called the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, taking calls trying to help those in need, and says 988 is long overdue.
I think just the mere existence of it as a mental health crisis helpline is going to do a lot, because it's saying we're making mental health as important as 911 emergencies. It's just going to normalize mental health support. You don't feel shame for calling 911. You shouldn't feel shame for calling 988.
Someone dies from suicide in the U.S. about every 11 minutes. It's the second leading cause of death for people aged 10 to 14 and 25 to 34.
Do you really think 988 is going to make a difference?
Yes, I really do.
Kathy Marchi of Samaritans hopes and expects more people will call the new 988 Lifeline before their situation becomes extremely dire.
I think that coming out of the pandemic, and one of the great silver linings is that we are all acknowledging the mental health challenges that we experience, the loneliness, the lack of being able to do the things that bring us stability or comfort.
But is America ready for 988? The Lifeline is a patchwork of around 200 local, independently owned and operated crisis centers.
I'll just kind of check up on you and see how you're doing.
Many run by nonprofits, staffed by volunteers, and straining to answer calls as quickly as they'd like to. A federal law created 988, but left each state to figure out how to fund it. A recent report said more than half of public health officials tasked with launching 988 said they needed more resources.
And some states are more ready than others. When people dial now the 3-digit number, you're linked typically to the nearest center to you. However, if that call is not being able to be answered because that center is not properly resourced, it can roll over to a national backup center that no matter what happens when people call, they're going to get an answer if they can just hold on.
What do you say to people who might be watching or hearing this and are thinking about calling but can't quite get themselves to do it?
Call us, because you will be greeted by a person who is there to help you, a caring, non-judgmental ear in your time of need.
Ron Allett is joining us now live. Ron, I'm so glad that you are shining a light on this story. I thought it was incredibly powerful to hear one of those women say, you don't feel ashamed for calling 911. You shouldn't feel ashamed for calling 988, right? Because I think that speaks so much to why this is important. But do enough people know about this? How is the government? How are people getting the word out that starting Saturday, like really soon, this number is going to get fired up nationally?
They're doing interviews, as we have been doing with them. They're talking to a lot of media. They're getting out a lot of information on social media, targeting advocacy groups and mental health professionals. It's a very targeted campaign, and it's going to get more broad. It's going to widen as the months go on, and there's a bigger campaign planned for next year. I think they're kind of gearing this up slowly because the system as it exists now is under a lot of pressure. There's about 2.5 million calls a day to the Lifeline, and by the way, even when this 988 number goes into effect, the 800 number that's current will still work. You can use either one. But there's 2.5 million calls a day, and they think that because of the publicity surrounding this and the attention at it, those number of calls could double or even triple. And so there's a lot of concern about the stress on the system. But they still want you to call, as you heard. Right. If you can't get through to your local line, you will get an answer. They answer every call they possibly can. And the call is just the first step. The call is the beginning. What they want to do is then send people into local communities where they can get help and resources. The vision is to have mobile units that can go out and respond and meet people where they are to help who call in first. It's to have in communities certain facilities set aside for mental health crises, like there are ER rooms now for other kinds of medical emergencies. So this is a big step. The country's ready for it. People say it seems like a really good idea that time is overdue, but they're getting into it slowly, and hopefully it'll work and save a lot of lives.
That's the hope. Ron Allen, I'm so grateful to you for bringing that to us. Thank you. As you heard Ron report, 988 goes into effect everywhere on Saturday. But in the interim, if you or somebody that you know is struggling, this is the number that's active now, 1-800-273-TALK. There for you as a resource, again, becomes 988 in just 2 days from now everywhere. Coming up here on the show, families struggling as inflation soars. Our Lindsay Reiser takes us inside a food bank where lines are filled with people who need help feeding the people they love. We've talked about these concerns of a potential recession brewing after those new numbers in the last 24 hours showing we are hitting record high inflation numbers in this country. Stuff for things that are bought in bulk, wholesale prices, right? Surging more than 11% in just the last year. You know who that's bad for? Not great for retailers, because eventually that cost is going to get passed down to all of us for stuff like food. We told you how inflation is up now to the highest level since 1981, so not quite a record, I should say, but since the Muppet Show was around, the Biden administration says this 9.1% increase is unacceptably high and said slowing down prices is going to be Washington's top priority. We've got a lot of people struggling right now, though, as MSNBC's Lindsay Reiser found out. Watch.
Hallie, we know that Americans are spending more on everything from rent to clothes to food and also fuel, and it all has a ripple effect. Right now, I'm at the Community Food Bank of New Jersey, the largest food bank in the state, and gas prices are really hitting them hard. They have big 26-foot trucks, a fleet of about 20 of them. They pick up donations from grocery stores. They drop them off at food pantries. Their gas costs right now are an unexpected 41% increase year over year. So they're having to completely recalibrate their budget. So if that's the impact here, you can imagine also the impact at regular people's homes. And I talked to people who are waiting in line at a food pantry that gets food from this food bank, and they told me that they don't want to be waiting in line either, but all of their discretionary spending is gone. They can no longer go out on joyrides in their cars. They have to only go out for essential services so that gas stays in that tank. Here's a listen to what some of them told me.
We do what we can. You know, nobody likes standing out here in the heat and in the cold, because I was coming here in the winter time too. You know, but you do what you have to do to make ends meet.
Oh my goodness, it's just too much, overwhelming. I'm retired. I'm on a fixed income. I'm the recipient of a liver transplant. I've been well for 7 years now, and without this help, I don't know how I could make it, as far as food is concerned.
And while gas prices are about 40 cents cheaper than they were when they peaked last month, they're still about $1.45 more expensive than this time last year. So those prices are creeping down, but for folks, it is still much needed relief. Hallie?
Our Lindsay Reiser, thanks to her. That's a wrap for us for this hour. More for you here tomorrow, same time, same place. Thanks for being with us. We got more coverage picking up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.